Shalom, my dear friends. Here I am in the holy city of Tzfat in the Galilee, and I'm very happy that I'm able to connect with you today, despite the fact that Israel is at war, and we have been receiving alerts every few minutes to go to safe places, secure places from Iranian incoming ballistic missiles. It's a real miracle that I'm able to speak to you today. I was determined to do so before Purim, and despite the fact that Israel is at war, this started yesterday just around 8:15 on Shabbat morning, when the first sirens went off here in Tzfat, where we had been enjoying an otherwise peaceful and tranquil Shabbat. And indeed, here in the Galilee, things have been quiet yesterday and today, except for the alerts. I understand that there's been no actual damage in Safat or around here in the Galilee. However, that is far from being the case in the center of the country, where there have been perpetual barrages of missiles, and today some 10 people have been killed in a missile attack where the missile fell upon a bomb shelter where the roof collapsed, killing, as I say, 10 people inside at least, and more seriously injured. And so this is not a game. This is not, it's very hard to say exactly what is happening on the ground in Israel or in Iran. Obviously, the Israeli authorities are tight-lipped about any damage that occurs in Israel in order not to allow not to allow the enemy to gain further information about ourselves. However, the situation in Iran, we are hearing from intentions, things have been going receiving, which is now backed up by international. Much of the leading echelon of Iran's leadership have been eliminated in the very first strike. Sirens going off in Israel. This was indeed a surprise attack, and it seems to have been successful in the sense of firing the first shot to Shabbat morning in broad daylight. People get killed, people get wounded, children become orphans, women become widowed, and so many other disasters. But Islamic Republic, and they have made no pretense and have made no attempt to hide their intent to wipe Israel off the map. This has been stated explicitly by leader after leader of Iran and by member after member of the Iranian government for many, many years. And Iran has indeed been the serpent's brain from which has extended this entire nexus of terror across the world. We know that in Argentina, the bombing of the Israeli embassy years ago was Iranian work, and so countless other works of terror. And this is the way of the Iranian regime. The leaders of the regime are fanatical Muslims who believe that at the end of time Islam has to rule the entire world, and that all Jews have to be eliminated. Explicit philosophy, as I say, they have made no attempt to hide it, and according to the law of the Torah, if somebody is coming to kill you, then you make sure you get in there first and kill them. And that is what the Israeli government has been doing over the last days in the aftermath of their war earlier this year. I can tell you that having lived in Israel since 1980, the entire strategic situation of Israel has shifted in a most amazing way. My very first visit here to Israel was in 1970 as a tourist from Britain for a 3-week trip around the country as a young student, and that was just 3 years after the Six-Day War, when Israel had expanded territorially to include the whole of Judea and Samaria desert. And at that time in 1970, prior to the 1973 war, Israel itself was riding high in the confidence attained by the military successes, the astounding miracles of the Six-Day War. However, 1973, the Yom Kippur War was a watershed for Israel. It is said that the American Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, intentionally planned that Israel would lose the war as if to boost the Arab pride and to get some kind of agreements going between the Arabs and the Israelis. The Yom Kippur War was a terrible disaster for Israel, with a terrible number of casualties, and the shock to Israeli pride after the successes of the Six-Day War. Morale was seriously dented. Interestingly, the wave of teshuvah, repentance, across the Jewish world, including myself, started in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. I was one of very many in the mid-1970s who were searching for our Torah roots and trying to understand where Israel fitted with all of that. And by the year 1980, I found myself married to an Israeli girl and living in Jerusalem at a time when, as I say, the strategic situation from the point of Israel was completely different from that of today. Israel was surrounded by hostile enemies in Syria, with the Assad regime, in Jordan, while ostensibly an ally by the later 1980s and 1990s. Nevertheless, until today, Jordanians have never given up their hostility to Israel. Likewise, Egypt, which until today has massive armies on the border between the Sinai Desert, which they received back from Israel in the Begin Sadat settlement after the 73 war in the late 1970s. Nevertheless, Israel's strategic situation today is completely different. Then Israel was enmeshed in wars in Lebanon. We had in the 1980s, 1990s, the growing intifadas, peaking in the 2000s, and we had the disastrous Gaza expulsion of Jews in 2005. We've had all the disasters of the rise of Hamas in Gaza, and Israel being surrounded just a couple of years back in the south by Hamas in Gaza, heavily armed by Iran, in the north in Lebanon by Hezbollah, in Syria with a hostile regime, and the situation in Egypt and Jordan continuing unspoken hostility. And yet today Israel's situation quite clearly is that Israel is militarily dominant across the Middle East. And this is nothing less than a historic reality. We may say that after many, many years of successive American administrations that did everything in their power to thwart Israeli success militarily, to keep Israel under restraints, it is a fact that under the present administration of President Donald Trump, Israel has been given leeway to develop their own arms industry independently, which is burgeoning ahead, very much in demand by people across the world, despite so much hostility to Israel across the world. Israel arms sales at our all-time high internationally. And as we have seen today, Israel can rule the skies in Lebanon. Israel is in the process of entirely eliminating Hamas in Gaza. The Houthi Yemenites are an irritant and can cause damage, and yet they are not exactly on Israel's borders, and their military sophistication is not much match for Israel. And what we've seen in the last few days is, as I say, truly historic. That Israel, together with the United States, have essentially begun the complete downfall of the regime of the Iranian mullahs. It's quite obvious that this is what is happening and will continue to happen. And although the war may not be completed within just a few days, and there are likely to be pockets of resistance, and the Iranian revolutionary Guard Corps will undoubtedly try to continue their resistance. Nevertheless, there's been a fundamental shift not only in the Middle East, but I would say in terms of our approach to the ultimate redemption. And I think that it is, one may not underestimate the historical significance of what has been happening. For years, Iran has been a terrifying ogre for Israelis. With their repeated threats to eliminate Israel, with their support for Hamas and Hezbollah and for terrorism across the world, they were a truly real threat, with lives lost, terror attacks sponsored by Iran. And suddenly this dragon is being cut down bit by bit in the most amazing way. And this is all happening exactly on the threshold of Purim. We today, on the 12th of Adar of this year, 5786, we are 2 days before Purim, which begins tomorrow night, Monday evening, March the 2nd, and is celebrated across the world on Tuesday, March the 3rd, and then on Wednesday will be Shushan Purim, the second day of Purim, observed in Jerusalem and other cities that were walled cities in the time of Joshua, and also noted by Jews across the world. We are well and truly in the days of Purim, which are all about the downfall of a villain that plotted the murder of all of the Jewish people. A mass series of pogroms, all designed to occur on one day, the 13th of Adar. And this was in the time of Haman in Shushan, then the capital of the Middle East and the world. The Persian Empire was a world empire at that time, which had taken down Babylon. Babylon having taken down Assyria, Ashur, Nebuchadnezzar. When he came to power in Babylon, he finished off Nineveh, and Sennacherib had been defeated in his unsuccessful attempt to lay siege to Jerusalem. So Assyria, once a great power, had been felled by the Babylonians. And then after Nebuchadnezzar, and just 2 generations after him, Babylon was felled by a combination of the Medes and the Persians. And the story of Purim occurred after the downfall of Babylon some years later. And the many parallels between the history of Purim and what is going on today are quite extraordinary and should add depth to our observance of this Purim. Here we are, the majority of us, except for people who are active on active service in the armed forces, all of the civilians are in Israel affected by the war, by the majority of the people running to bomb shelters every time there is an alert. And I remind you, there may be an alert any moment as I speak now, as we had one just moments before we started today. And this is happening across the world. However, the Jewish people and our allies and our friends across the world are not in active combat, but actively involved. And for us, the message of Purim is that when we look at the downfall of Iran after 47 years of arrogantly trumpeting their intention to wipe Israel off the map, and now these mullahs are themselves being eliminated in droves day by day in Iran. This flip over, this is exactly what happens in the story of the Megillah, where all the way through the earlier part of the story, Haman is plotting with the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, to commit this massacre, and nowhere in the entire Megillah is mentioned the name of God, any more than in our news coverage today and in all of these statements of the American president about recent campaigns and this campaign. There is no mention of the divine finger. Where is God's finger in all of this? Did President Donald Trump decide to give a green light to the attack on Iran? And if he did, was it his decision? Or is it in accordance with the saying of King Solomon that the heart of kings is in the hands of God, that God put it into his heart to do this? We have seen over the years of previous American administrations, the Clinton years, the Obama years, the Biden years, the terrible restraints put upon Israel to do anything to defend ourselves. And all of a sudden, the American people, despite everything that happened in the 2020 election, and one might have thought that Donald Trump was finished and that the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again move, was finished. Nevertheless, somehow everything has been turning around until today. We have this, just yesterday, the Shabbat Zachor, when Jews across the world were reminding ourselves of the evils perpetrated by Amalek, seeking to destroy the weak, the young, the aged. As this was happening, so Iran itself was falling, the mullahs were falling down. This is the historical significance is, I think, on a scale of the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945 through the Allies, the alliance between USA and Russia and the other allies to defeat the Nazis. I think that the defeat of the mullahs in Iran is of a tremendous significance, as I will presently elaborate. But again, this point that we do not see directly the finger of God in the unfolding of events today. Certainly, the Israeli pilots that went off on their missions yesterday were blessed by rabbis, by religious, by non-religious, believers and non-believers. They themselves said their prayers as they flew the thousands of kilometers across the Middle East to bomb Iraq on these missions, and miraculously came back unscathed, all of them, some 200 airplanes. The coordination, the intelligence coordination, the miracles of information that enabled the identification of a top-level meeting in Tehran of their leadership that was bombed intentionally. This is all can only be coordinated on high. And indeed, the significance of the coming downfall of Iran is historically tremendous. The sages of Israel 2,000 years ago foresaw that Paras would be a power at the end of days. In the prophecy of Ezekiel of the war of Gog and Magog, among the alliance of nations with Gog is Paras, together with several other players on the international stage now, all can be identified with Israel's enemies, all coming against us. In the words of the sages in the Talmud, in the tractate of Yoma, whose central subject is the procedures of the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, there is brought a discussion among the sages about who will destroy who at the end of days. Will Edom destroy Paras at the end of days, or will Paras destroy Edom at the end of days? And there is a disagreement among our sages, and the accepted view is that Edom would actually destroy Paras at the end of days, and that this would inaugurate the era of Moshiach. And it's not impossible that this is what we are beginning to see unfolding in front of our eyes today, because the fall of the mullahs is a blow to extremist Islam that is revisionist in denying the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. Islam depends upon displacing the prophecy of Moses with the prophecy of their founder, and the more that the Jews refused to accept their founder as a prophet, the more he became antagonistic to the Jews and would kill, massacre, capture, enslave Jews in his time, and has left this legacy in what people today would like to think of as extremist Islam. And certainly the Iranian mullahs have been among the leaders of extremist Islam, by no means alone. There are others, such as in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia, and others who are no less extreme in their views, some of whom practice the practice of taqiyya, that is of dissimulation, of hiding your true intentions behind a pleasant smile. But without doubt, Iran was one of the leaders of this. Now, interestingly, Iran, in responding to the attacks yesterday on Iran by US and Israel, by attacking USA bases in so many countries in the Middle East around them, in Bahrain and in the United Arab Emirates and in Abu Dhabi and in Qatar and a number of others, this has actually severely alienated the Sunni Arab world from the Shia Iranian regime. Interestingly enough, Iran has actually seemingly no active allies at the moment. Hezbollah have been sitting at the sidelines in Lebanon. All of the missiles coming to Israel these last days, yesterday and today, have been from Iran. And thank God the majority have not succeeded in reaching any real targets. But Hezbollah have been pretty much silenced. Hamas have nothing anymore. They are powerless. And so Iran's big allies, who are Russia and China, have also, while expressing their solidarity with Iran, have in practice done absolutely nothing to support Iran against USA and Israeli attacks. It is very, very noteworthy. We are clearly witnessing Russia is involved in Ukraine, and China has their internal problems, and China has their saving up for when they want to act against Taiwan. Everybody has their interests, and the miracle is that precisely at this moment God has put this figure, Donald J. Trump, who in some ways does remind one of Ahasuerus, somewhat not exactly all there all the time, very, very sharp, but somewhat of a speaking too much nevertheless, here he is, fickle, saying one thing one day, one thing another day. The question is, where is all this leading? I mentioned the impact of the downfall of Iran as an Islamic republic on the Islamic world, which is very significant because today Saudi Arabia, which is of course the central country and in many ways the supposed leader of the Islamic world, is either playing a game of supreme dissimulation in presenting themselves as being in stages of modernization, or else perhaps they are. I've mentioned on several occasions that our outstanding biblical commentator known as the Malbim, in his commentary on the visions of Daniel, speaking about the monster in chapter 7 verse 11, where Daniel witnesses this monster that has these 10 heads and this mouth that speaks these grandiose words, and Daniel witnesses the destruction of this monster. And there Malbim states that this is a prophecy of the downfall of the Dat HaYishmaelim, the law of the Ishmaelites, who denied the Torah, who sought to change the Torah, and indeed whose founder is exemplified by this idea of the mouth speaking grandiosely. And Malbim there states that the final din, the final judgment at the end of days will be with the downfall of this revisionist religion that sought to uproot, God forbid, the Torah of Moshe. So if we are witnessing now the chipping away of what in recent decades and more particularly recent years has seemed to be the chauvinistic growth by leaps and bounds of Islam, this present event in Iran is certainly putting a big change in that direction. It's very, very significant, I think, too early to assess, but certainly of very great importance, I would say. And particularly in terms of the statement of our sages, this is a Gemara in Yuma, Daf Yud Amud Aleph, page 10 on the A side of the page, where not only does it a Rav state that Edom will put down Paras at the end of days, but the Tosfos there comment that this will be the prelude to the coming of Moshiach. We heard in the 1990s, 1980s and 90s, long before this, when Iran was just rising and Israel was facing the wars in Lebanon, we heard from the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory many times the Midrash in the book of Isaiah, brought in the Midrash Yalkut Shimoni on Isaiah chapter 60, which says that in the time of the coming of Moshiach, Iran, Paras, will be threatening all of the world, and all the peoples of the world will fall on their faces, and the king of Arab, the king of Arabia, will run to the king of Aram. That's Arabia running to America. We see this happening in our time. And then the children of Israel will say, what shall we do? They're coming against us, the Persians, the Iranians, and God will say, now has come the time of your redemption. Have no fear, my children. This is your redemption. Well, are we seeing this unfolding in our eyes? I dare say this redemption cannot come easily. It cannot come without tears and sweat. And it's really up to us. And this is what gives so much significance to all of this happening now on Purim, because this is not just a news story that we are disconnected from. It involves every single one of us. As a person, as a Jew living in Israel, I know that Hamas and the mullahs and many other Islamic groups be only too happy to see me and my family, God forbid, not around. It's a personal threat. And if you believe that it's not coming for you also, then just look at what is happening in New York City and look at what is happening in cities across the United States and in Europe, in United Kingdom, in France, in Belgium, in Holland, in Sweden, and Australia, and many other countries. We could throw light on this difference of opinion in the Talmud about will Edom destroy Persia or will Persia destroy Edom? It may be that militarily America might destroy Iran, but at the same time the migrants across Europe and America are destroying the Edomite countries, and it's impossible really, in my view, to see that a great majority of these migrants will ever be sent away from those countries. Well, now, the forgotten dimension of all of this, and the forgotten dimension of the story of Purim, is precisely the building of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And that is the real question. Will the present war facilitate the building of our Holy Temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? Well, now, President Donald Trump, with all his seeming sentiments toward Israel, has stated categorically that no way will he sanction the annexation of the heartlands of Israel's ancestral lands, Judea and Samaria, to Israel. In other words, that part of the Messianic vision he is not prepared to countenance. And his vision for Gaza seems to be one that is at variance with the vision of Zephaniah the prophet, where Donald Trump seems to think that Gaza will become a spa center with luxury hotels and entertainments, casinos, and the wonderful Mediterranean weather. And what exactly will happen with all of the Hamas sympathizers in the Gaza population? That is another question. But the prophet Zephaniah says that at the end of days, all of those once Philistine areas, Gaza, and all of the associated areas are all to come under Judah, Yehudah, and they will become pastures for flocks, which could also mean places for the rearing of new generations of tender Jewish children who are the flocks of the future. Well, now, the story of Purim is all about facilitating the temple. For when did the story of Purim happen? It's a great shame that many Jewish people never get to study either the book of Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, nor do they study the 12 smaller prophets, the shorter prophets, particularly not those prophets that we in the Azamra annual circuit of the Bible, Know Your Bible, we are now on the prophets of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Now these three prophets were prophesying after 70 years of exile of Judea in Babylon. And the three of them were prophesying about the building of the Holy Temple. As I mentioned earlier, Babylon had fallen to the Medes and the Persians. Nebuchadnezzar had a son called Evil Merodach, who was somewhat more tender than Nebuchadnezzar. He actually, Evil Merodach released the Jechoniah, the king of Israel, from his captivity. And from that time on, the fortunes of Israel began to rise in Babylon. And then after Evil Merodach came the famous Belshazzar. And Belshazzar was the one who made his feast of wine, thinking that the time for the rebuilding of Jerusalem had passed and gone. Jerusalem would never be rebuilt. And he took out the temple vessels and had his people drink to their idols. And that very night, King Cyrus and King Darius the Mede, and his son-in-law Cyrus of Persia, they overwhelmed Belshazzar and Babylon, and the shift of power came to Persia and the Medes. Darius the Mede reigned only for a year or so, and afterwards there came his son-in-law Cyrus, and Cyrus at the beginning of his reign gave the green light to those who had come from Babylon, the Jews that returned to Jerusalem. He gave them the green light to build the temple, and he gave them encouragement to do so. And this was 70 years after Babylon had come to power. But it was not 70 years since the destruction of the first temple, because that only happened in the 18th year of Babylon's coming to power. And so that was the miscalculation. There were these 18 years between when they thought the temple was supposed to be rebuilt, and indeed they got the green light from Cyrus, king of Persia, and they started to build the foundation, but the true time had not yet come, because it was not yet 70 years from the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. That was only to be in 18 years hence. So right after they laid the foundations, there were the enemies of the Jews in Israel. Who were these enemies? These were the very nations that King Sennacherib of Assyria had brought from Kuta and other places in Central Asia into the land of Israel to replace the Jewish population of Israel, where the 10 tribes had previously lived. So there's these tribes known as the Kutim, later known as the Samaritans, because their center was in Samaria, where they had displaced the 10 tribes, and they were in alliance with none other than the sons of Haman. And this is happening in those years between the coming to the throne of Cyrus and then his successor Ahasuerus. And at the beginning of the reign of Ahasuerus, already the enemies of the Jews, the sons of Haman, had succeeded in writing letters to the Persian authorities to halt the building of the new Second Temple. And all this is related in detail in the book of Ezra and subsequently in Nehemiah, how eventually Ezra came up to Israel and how eventually the Second Temple was rebuilt. And this is also the theme of the prophecies of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, these last 3 of the 12 shorter prophets. And all of these sources, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, for somebody who really wants to understand the Megillah of Esther, the scroll of Esther, these are the indispensable historical documents. Because it was precisely the Purim miracle that caused the flip, whereas until then they had not allowed the rebuilding of the temple, and the rebuilding of the temple did not happen in the reign of Ahasuerus himself. But after he died, at the end of these 18 years, which saw the completion of 70 years from the destruction of the first temple, at that time there was already the son of Queen Esther, King Darius II, Darius of Persia, and he was the one who gave the green light and asked for prayers for Persia in the Second Temple. So it was because Esther succeeded in seeing the overthrow of Haman and found favor in the eyes of the Persian king, and she was the mother of the next king of Persia, Darius. It was through this, the Purim miracle, that the Second Temple was built. So I look at what is happening today, and we have watched how, since I came to Israel, Iraq was cut down to size. Jordan, which was a very painful enemy of Israel in 1948 and 1967, is now powerless, and despite their fanatical anti-Semitic outpourings, they completely depend on Israeli water and Israeli security. Egypt, for all their talk, is a very unstable country, and Israel could probably overwhelm Egypt militarily very quickly, particularly now that Iraq is out of the picture and Iran is out of the picture, and Saudi has no interest in bolstering Egypt. And Turkey, likewise, is really, I think, will turn out to be a paper dragon. Well, now, in all the discussions between the earlier rabbis of Israel and the later sages about the war of Gog and Magog, there is a tradition from the Gaon of Vilna that the war of Gog and Magog can be solved without too much trouble. In other words, it does not have to be a most colossal military war. Certainly Israel has witnessed military wars and enemy build-ups on our borders and within us. We've witnessed the terror, we've witnessed the Hamas invasion, we've witnessed the Hezbollah missiles, and now the Iranian missiles. But compared, for example, to what was happening in Europe in the Second World War with the destruction of major parts of cities like Dresden, large parts of London, and many other, Coventry in Britain, other places. Certainly, I don't like to try to compare the scale of destruction, but it seems to me that today our war is first and foremost in the realm of the spirit and the realm of what we might call ideas. To me, it seems that the Jewish people must be preparing now for this coming temple. There are certainly many Jewish people in Israel and across the world, many Noahides, many supporters of Israel and of the Jewish people who are very, very fired by the idea of the coming temple. There is a facility where the red heifer is being carefully groomed, and it's rather secretive what's going on there, but there are rumors that there are red heifers available which could greatly facilitate the purification of all the people from impurity through contact with the dead. There are Israel's true patriots, I would say, those known as the Hilltop Youth, who are a demonized group whom everyone in the mainstream media wants to categorize as dangerous hooligans because they have to face Arab robbers, sheep robbers, and destroyers of olive trees and so on. And some of them certainly would be said to have a perfect right to take physical action against people who are taking physical action against them. But by and large, there are people who simply want to settle the hills of Judea and Samaria, to settle the ancestral homelands of Israel at a time when, under the very eyes of the Israeli authorities, there are Palestinian buildings going on in areas where they have no authority to build, day and night expanding Arab villages and towns, where you see buildings cropping up like mushrooms day by day. And here this heroic group of the so-called Hilltop Youth want to defend our ancestral land. And so there are other Israelis who are preparing for the temple, and people outside of the land of Israel studying the temple, thinking about the temple. And on this Purim, which is about, for each one of us, the non-combatants, our combat is on the battlefield of prayer, where Purim is a day of prayer for every single Jew, for every person who has a Jewish heart and a Jewish soul. Purim is a time when even the poorest of the poor can stretch out a hand and an answer will be received. There's a law in the Code of Jewish Law that on Purim we answer, we give to whoever stretches out their hand for a little gift, a little help. And so too the Almighty gives to whoever stretches out their hand in prayer, begging for divine help and assistance. So this is our job. Like in the time of Esther, she knew that what was necessary was to bring all the Jews in Shushan to the synagogues, that even the little children must fast and pray and pour in our hearts, because really we are on the very, we can shift the whole thing now. It is in our power to shift it towards the redemption. We see that this is a matter of the spirit. It's a matter of self-confidence. It's a matter, despite all of the vapor coming out of the Iranians now, their confidence has been absolutely shattered. It's obvious by the completely irrational way in which they're firing off missiles everywhere without any meaningful intent. They're just at random. So it's really up to us. We see that in the Megillah, the whole redemption comes through the hidden finger of God. Not once is it mentioned how God intervenes, but at every stage God is present. It is God who interrupts the sleep of King Ahasuerus at night when he calls to ask, who is there? Whom have we not given sufficient honor to? To Haman, let us give him honor. All this is from the hidden finger of God, and so too now with us. And each one of us is a holy soul who has the power to influence heaven through the words of our lips, through the intent of our heart, through the brokenness of our hearts. We have been so far from perfect. We have sinned with our mouths, with our deeds, with our thoughts. But even so, we do yearn for this temple. Almighty God, we're now studying these portions in the Torah about the sanctuary and the temple. Now is the time. It can be. Show us. You've shown us so many miracles. Show us. And this is our power on Purim. So this is how we must celebrate Purim now in the face of war. This is a war not only that Israel is facing, because it really is a war against America. How many times have the leaders of Iran said that they must have death to America, death to Israel? It's a war against America. It was the Iranians who held Americans hostages at the time of the revolution, Iranians who humiliated American soldiers, Iranians who caused the deaths of American soldiers in Lebanon, and who knows how many crimes are being committed by agents of Iran across the world today. So we're all at threat, and we can all influence God Almighty with our prayers, and through the love and tenderness we now show to one another, which is what Purim is also so much about, where the Jewish people united in common love, and the practices of Purim, giving gifts to the needy and sending our friends portions of tasty foods. This all speaks of the unity among us. And it is through this mutual kindness and affection that we draw down God's presence to us through the Purim celebrations. And so, my friends, let us draw the spirit of love and tenderness to our friends, to our allies, to our dear ones, to our families, even to those that hate us. We can pray that God will bring them to their senses. And this Purim we shall surely see through the power of our faith in God, our way to the coming redemption speedily in our time. Amen.